The night silence died in the favela. A door being broken down. The sound of splintering wood. Muffled screams echoing through narrow alleys. This is the last thing a woman hears before her life turns into a nightmare. And all of this happened in the very heart of a Brazilian favela, where fear is already part of daily life, but where that night surpassed all imaginable limits of terror. What you are about to discover will completely change the way you see urban violence, the power of organized crime, and the fragility of life in communities forgotten by the state. Brace yourself, because this story has no going back, and every second will hold you until the last breath of a brutal truth that no one dares to tell. It was an ordinary Tuesday. The sun had already hidden behind the hills, leaving only the dim lights of lamps hanging from makeshift poles. Children were still playing in the alleys, women washing dishes at their doorsteps, men chatting in relaxed circles. Life followed its slow, tired, but familiar rhythm. No one imagined that very night, terror would knock on Joanna's door, a 32-year-old black woman, mother of 2 small children, a tireless worker who woke before sunrise to sell meal boxes in the city center. Joanna was known by everyone. Her wide smile lit up even the grayest days. She was the type of person who helped neighbors, lent sugar, took care of the street children when mothers needed to go out. But that night, Joanna would become a victim of something much bigger than her, much crueler than anyone could imagine. Around 9 at night, a black car parked at the end of the street. 3 men got out. They weren't from the community. They wore dark clothes, caps pulled down low, and carried something heavy underneath their shirts. The residents who saw them pass quickly looked away. They knew that kind of visit never brought good news. The men walked with firm, determined steps, like those who already know exactly where they want to go. And they knew. Their destination was Joanna's house. A few minutes later, the door was broken down with a violent kick. The noise echoed throughout the entire street. The children stopped playing. The conversation ceased. Silence took over the favela like a thick, suffocating shadow. Joanna was home alone. Her children were sleeping at their grandmother's house, just a few meters away. She was finishing tidying up the kitchen when she heard the crash. Before she could react, the 3 men were already inside her living room. One of them, the leader, was tall, thin, with cold eyes and a scar that cut across his face from his left eye to his mouth. He approached slowly, smiling in a way that froze the soul. Joanna backed away, tried to scream, but a heavy hand covered her mouth with brutal force. What happened in the following hours inside that house is difficult to describe without feeling a tightness in the chest. Joanna was dragged to the bedroom. Tied to a chair. Questioned about something she swore she didn't know. The men believed she was hiding money, drugs, or information about a rival operation. But Joanna knew nothing. She was just a worker trying to survive. That didn't matter to them. The torture began with slaps. Then punches. Then something much worse. Objects were used to cause pain. Racist insults were screamed in her face. They laughed while she cried. They smoked while she bled. The cruelty had no limit, no reason, no humanity. Joanna begged. Asked to see her children. Promised she wouldn't tell anyone. But they didn't stop. For those men, Joanna wasn't a person. She was just a target, a message, an example of what happens when someone supposedly crosses the wrong path. Meanwhile, the neighbors heard everything. The muffled screams, the sounds of impact, the desperate crying. But no one dared to leave their homes. No one called the police. Because everyone knew that calling the police in the favela, in that situation, could mean their own death. Fear paralyzed. Omission became an involuntary accomplice. And Joanna remained inside, alone, facing the worst nightmare a human being can live through. The night dragged on as if it lasted years. Time seemed to have stopped. And when the men finally finished, they simply left. Without hurry. Without fear. They got into the black car and disappeared into the darkness, leaving behind only the trail of blood, pain, and terror. Joanna was found hours later by her mother, who had found the silence of the house strange. The scene was devastating. Joanna was unconscious, covered in wounds, bruises all over her body, swollen eyes, split lips, deep marks on her wrists where the ropes had cut her skin. The ambulance took almost an hour to arrive. When it arrived, the paramedics were shocked by her condition. Joanna was rushed to the nearest hospital, where she underwent emergency surgeries. The doctors said she was lucky to be alive. But what kind of luck is that? Lucky to survive to carry forever the physical and emotional scars of a night that destroyed her soul. Lucky to wake up every day remembering the faces of the men who tortured her. Lucky to have to explain to her children why their mother now trembles when hearing a door noise. Joanna's case is not isolated. It is just one among thousands that happen every day in Brazil's peripheries, in forgotten favelas, in communities where the state doesn't reach, but organized crime does. Black women, especially, are recurring victims of this brutal, silent violence invisible to society's eyes. They are tortured, raped, murdered, and many times their cases don't even make the news. They become just another statistic, another cold number in reports that no one reads. Gender violence combined with structural racism creates a scenario of terror where these women live constantly threatened, without protection, without voice, without justice. And what's most frightening is that the aggressors know this. They know they can act with impunity, that they will hardly be arrested, that they will rarely face real consequences. That's why the cruelty increases. That's why torture becomes more common. That's why fear spreads like an incurable disease. Joanna survived physically, but psychologically she was never the same. She developed post-traumatic stress disorder, began having panic attacks, lost her job because she could no longer leave the house alone. Her children, even without having directly witnessed what happened, carry the emotional weight of their mother's trauma. The entire family now lives under the constant shadow of fear. And the men who did this to her? They remain free. They continue acting. They continue spreading terror through other communities, other homes, other lives. Joanna's story forces us to face an uncomfortable truth. As long as we continue ignoring the reality of the favelas, as long as we continue treating these communities as separate territories, as if they weren't part of the same country, the same society, we will be allowing more Joannas to be tortured, more families to be destroyed, more lives to be lost. Urban violence is not just a public security problem. It's a humanity problem. It's the failure of a system that abandoned millions of people to their own fate, that let organized crime fill the void left by the state, that normalized the death and suffering of those who live in the peripheries. What happened to Joanna should shock all of us. It should keep us awake at night. It should make us question what kind of society we are, what kind of country we've built, what kind of future we want to leave. Because as long as there is a Joanna being tortured in some Brazilian favela, as long as there is a black woman screaming for help without anyone hearing her, as long as there are children growing up amid constant fear, none of us will be truly safe. The terror that knocked on Joanna's door can knock on anyone's door. The violence that destroyed her life can destroy other lives. And the silence that allowed all of this can continue allowing it, until it's too late. Joanna today tries to rebuild her life piece by piece. With help from volunteer psychologists, with support from human rights organizations, with the strength that only a mother has when she needs to move forward for her children. But the marks remain there. Visible and invisible. And her story needs to be told, needs to be heard, needs to echo far beyond the walls of the favela where it all happened. Because only when we truly look at this reality, without looking away, without minimizing the pain, without forgetting the names and faces of the victims, maybe we can begin to change something. Maybe we can begin to build a country where no Joanna needs to live in fear, where no woman is tortured by unpunished gangsters, where no life is worth less because of skin color or the address on a document. Until then, stories like this will continue to happen. And silence will continue to be the greatest accomplice of all.